Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next session of CME Palooza. My name is Scott Covert. I am one of the co-producers of CME Palooza, and I would like to welcome you to this session entitled The CE Report Card, Reading the Industry Performance in a Virtual World. This is one of our gold sponsored sessions. This session is sponsored by Academic CME. Our moderator for the session is Dr. Charles Pollack. Dr. Pollack is the medical director of Academic CME. So as with all of our sessions, I'd like to recognize our sponsors before we begin. Our gold sponsors, Daiichi Sankyo, Physicians Education Resource, Academic CME. Our silver sponsors, Pure Audience, Medscape Education, Clinical Care Options and Practicing Clinicians Exchange, Haymarket Medical Education, Helio CME, Projects and Knowledge, and Platform Q Health. Lovely little sweatshirt we have from Platform Q Health. Finally, our bronze sponsors, PVI.
Sorry, I didn't get a sweatshirt.
You're not special enough at Platform. Our bronze sponsors, PVI, Catalyst Medical Education, CMEology, the Academy for Continued Healthcare Learning, Vindigo Medical Education, Paradigm Medical Communications, the Postgraduate Institute for Medicine, Global Education Group, CE Outcomes, Integrity Continuing Education, Answers in CME, RMEI, Access Medical Education, MedIQ, Integritas Communications, Infograph Ed, Free CME, Med Learning Group, Primary Care Network, Prova Education, RedMed Ed, Peer Voice, and CME Outfitters. We'd like to thank all 33 of our sponsors for this fall. So there are two ways to ask questions for this and all CME Palooza sessions. You can use the free CME text line to send in a question. The number is 267-666-0CME, that's 0263. Or you can tweet your question to us using the CME Palooza hashtag. We will get to as many questions as we possibly can during this session. So one final slide, please note that the opinions, discussions, and or conclusions expressed by our panelists are those of our panelists and do not represent an endorsement by or position of their employer, its parent company, or their affiliates. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Pollack to get us started and introduce everyone else.
Thank you, Scott, and that about wraps up our hour. In all seriousness, I'd like to add my own appreciation to the 33 sponsors. It shows how important this meeting is in our industry, and it's very exciting to have such obvious buy-in from all of the people who work together in this space, where our aim is to improve healthcare by educating clinicians. I have the pleasure of moderating this session. As Scott said, I'm the medical director for Academic CME in Wayne, Pennsylvania. I'm also an academic emergency medicine physician and have been for about 36 years. I'm really proud to be joined by a very illustrious and highly regarded panel. And I'm going to quickly call on them and have them introduce themselves so they can tell you what they want you to know about them instead of me guessing. So I'm going to go in the order in which we're going to be speaking and ask John, can you just introduce yourself quickly?
Sure. My name is John Finicos. I'm the Executive Director of Pharmacy here at the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts.
Okay, thank you. Amy?
Hi, I'm Amy Perrin-Ross. I'm an advanced practice nurse at Loyola University Medical Center in the western suburbs of Chicago.
Thank you. Christine?
Hi, I'm Christine Berger. I'm a senior manager in independent medical education at Bristol Myers Squibb, formerly Heritage Celgene.
Great. And Lynn?
Hi, everyone. I'm Lynn Yale, Senior Manager at Bristol Myers Squibb, as well as Heritage Celgene, supporting medical education requests in immunology and fibrosis.
Great. So if you're keeping score, you notice we have a physician, a pharmacist, an advanced practice nurse, and two representatives of industry. And that's very deliberate because our topic is to look at how the industry has done over the last 6 months or so. Now, many of you represent CE interests that have had an active presence online for a while, but effective about 6 months ago, we all had to move in that direction, whether we were ready to or not. And, it's pretty unclear when that might change. And so if we look at this as, as an academic year, 6 months is a semester maybe. And so we thought it might be a good idea if we give ourselves a report card. If we look to see how we've done in responding to the change in circumstances, the change in availability of our learners, the change in meeting venues, the change in attitude, the change in time that people have as clinicians to engage in education when they have so many clinical demands, it seems a propitious moment to look back and see whether or not we would give ourselves a passing grade. And I think the only way to do that appropriately would be to look at it from these perspectives of different clinicians who need the education that we all try to offer. So again, physician, pharmacist, and advanced practice nurse. And then I think we'd be remiss in grading ourselves if we didn't talk to the people who pay for these programs. So that's why industry is represented here, because they've had to adjust their expectations of what can be delivered to clinicians just as we have. So I'm going to start this off. There are 5 of us, as you've heard, so I'm going to try to go fairly quickly so we have time for questions at the end. And I think there also will be some interesting crosstalk among the faculty. Again, I'm here to represent physician interest in terms of the new world of continuing healthcare education. But again, I'm an emergency medicine physician. And I have to tell you that one thing that COVID has done is shone a bright spotlight on my colleague in emergency medicine, and also our colleagues in emergency medical services, ambulances, first responders. We haven't had this much publicity since George Clooney was playing me on TV. So it's fun to be in the spotlight, but it hasn't been pleasant. You've seen very real stories of overwork, of exhaustion, of mental stress, of family stress. And factored into all of that and laying it out on the line every day to take care of patients at volumes and at levels of acuity with which we simply have not been familiar. And then many of us going home to family members and worrying whether we should quarantine ourselves. As you imagine, there's been a lot of sort of lazy attitude about maintaining education. And that's not a good thing, but it's a fact of life. We all have to prioritize things. Emergency medicine people are probably better than most at prioritizing, because we're always doing that. We're always multitasking when we're on shift taking care of patients. And to the extent that education has been important, unless you are like me in the unfortunate situation of having to recertify this year, so you having to review everything. Probably what we've been most interested in is continuing education about this battle we're fighting. So continuing education about the appropriate use of PPE, of approaching the treatment environment if there's not enough PPE, when we should be starting certain medications, what the evidence is underlying certain medications. One of the things we've seen a lot of in the emergency department is patients coming in asking for medications. Perhaps their favorite politician recommended something, or they saw something online, or they saw something from a newspaper in Rome that they talked about a new therapy being tried in northern Italy. And we're in a position where we're trying to rush through care, provide excellent care, but also take care of that patient and address his or her concerns. And the only way to do that is to try to stay current. And so I think it's been a big challenge for the CE industry to try to provide up-to-date content to providers on the front lines. And in that, I would include clinicians who work in the intensive care unit as well, because obviously that's where a lot of our COVID patients have ended up. And one of the things that I think we had trouble with at first, if you remember when I introduced our panel, I talked about representing the industry, the ones who pay for these programs to be delivered. At the outset of this, at the beginning of the pandemic, companies were sort of trying to figure out what they were going to do. None of them clearly, and to no one's surprise, none of them had a product that they wanted to educate people about, or a class of products wanted to educate people about, because we had no idea how we were going to treat these patients. Much of what was being done for them was supportive care only, in which no one pharma company or even device company has a primary stake. And so it took a while for us to develop new networks and new means of supporting programs so that we could get education out to people who needed it in real time. I think one of the things that is a result of the last 6 months, this first semester, if you will, is that we've come to appreciate and understand more the need for just-in-time education. So that's different from virtual education or from virtual American Heart Association or virtual American College of Cardiology. This is looking up a specific topic when you're in the physician's work area or even at a patient's bedside, and getting the essentials of education on that topic while you're standing there. And I think that need for urgency and that need for validity of sourcing has never been more important. So I think that one of the things we've tried to do at Academic CME, I know a number of our partner pharma companies have tried to support as well, is the delivery of that just-in-time information. Unfortunately, it's not that easy, because the just-in-time information that you supply with a couple of references that generally are observational studies, for the most part, that's all we have right now, may be out of date 2 or 3 weeks from now. So I think we've been looking to our industry partners, our supporters, to give us a little leeway in refreshing our content. And then I think it's our responsibility as providers of the education to be sure that we do that, to be sure that whatever content we have streaming out to our learners is up to date, does reflect the latest that we know, and is appropriately couched in the caveats that this information may change. So, as we now move into an era, hopefully over the next several months, where we have probably more than one vaccine on the market, there are going to be patient selection issues around that. There's going to be continuous updates as more and more people are exposed to these vaccines, and we're seeing longer-term effects. And realize we're defining long-term much different than we used to. Long-term follow-up for a vaccine used to be measured in months to years, and now we're talking about looking at weeks. Because we're so desperate to get something to bend the curve, if you will. So, as a CE faculty member, what I find the questions that I'm getting reflecting is that need for just-in-time education. It's rare that I give a talk now that someone doesn't say, I just saw an article yesterday that addresses this, or maybe that contradicts what you just told me. And so, as a faculty member, I've got to be prepared to address that. I've got to be familiar with the literature. And I think we should all appreciate and understand that our faculty are under a lot of stress to stay current on things for the benefit of their audiences, while still also providing care. So I think that's a brief list of the challenges facing physicians in practice as well as physicians in education. And I would give us, in terms of a grade, I would give us probably a solid B. I think if I looked at the first couple of months of the last 6, I would probably give us a D. But I think we pulled our grade up by understanding what the marketplace needs, what our learners need. And I think that our industry supporters have started catching up with us as well, and looking at education that's important to the well-being of larger populations of patients than perhaps they were looking at before. So I could keep opining, but there are 4 other people behind me who are going to give you different perspectives, and I'm very happy to turn it over to my friend John Finikos now, who's going to talk about these same sorts of issues, but from the pharmacist perspective.
Thank you, Charlie. This is a wonderful opportunity, I think, to share not only the experiences over the last 6 months, but for me, 36 years here at the hospital. And I think, honestly, for pharmacist-focused education, I think we continue to get better each year that goes by. When I first got into this business, most of the educational programs provided, global information, a 10,000-foot view. And as our profession becomes more and more specialized, I think what you're seeing is more targeted information, not only drug information, but disease information as well, that a pharmacist can take away in just about any practice setting and apply it the next day into their daily routines. So I think it's incredibly important that as a pharmacist, not only do I need to know the drugs themselves, I need to have a pretty good background of what the physician knows and what their practice patterns are. I need to know what the gaps are for our nurses, what they know, and what I need to tell them. And then my colleagues that I'm working with side by side. So my perspective, I think, not only to Charlie's point, worried about keeping myself up to date, but keeping myself up to date in a way I can support our doctors and I can support our nurses in their day-to-day activities. So I think we've done well in that. I come from a Harvard teaching hospital where the tradition has been in-person lectures. Someone usually from the organization or out of town that has spent their entire life on a disease state or a condition or a development of a drug, comes with the emotion, if you will, the enthusiasm surrounding what's new and what is being delivered to patients to improve their care. And of course, in that setting, at the end of a conference, you always have the opportunity to rub elbows and converse with your colleagues, not only to get their perspective, but in many instances to get the expert's opinion and what works and plays out in routine or real life. In the current COVID sessions that we've had, we moved to a virtual environment. And every single program that we've had here that was in person or in a grand rounds or a morbidity and mortality presentation is being done virtually. I miss the opportunities to chat with people at the breaks and at the end of a program or in the hallway transitioning to and from a lecture. And I think that's one of the challenges I have is getting, real-time opinions of the folks that I work with and then the experts that come to our facility to give us guidance and education and work with them. The virtual environment poses its own challenges because there's no boundaries. And with all due respect to most of the clinicians here, we don't look at the clock. And many of the meetings that we have are scheduled late into the day and late into the evening. In fact, we have a pulmonary embolism meeting tonight at 7 o'clock that'll probably run to 8:30, 9 o'clock. And I will tell you the challenges here are trying to find amongst all of the programs, the ones that are going to be most important to you in terms of education. And being judicious in the selection and still maintaining your boundaries where you can eat food, take on personal hygiene, get some sleep, and be back here the next day. I think the programs that have been introduced over the last year have been incredibly efficient. We have global access to a wide range of topics. A day doesn't go by where there's probably 5 or 10 different opportunities for me to join some sort of virtual meeting or conference call and be educated on topics as extreme as organ transplantation to something as simple as managing a condition like neutropenia. So there's lots and lots of opportunities for global and a wide range of education. To Charlie's point, I think during the COVID pandemic, some of the information that we had came hot and heavy, and the environment now that we live in facilitated that. I had a 2-week warning of what was happening in New York City relative to the COVID pandemic. The just routine discussions about patient management, supply chain management, personal protective equipment gave me an incredible jump on preparing my people here, standing up our pharmacists to support clinicians in our emergency room and our intensive care areas where in many instances it was not the physician's specialty. We were asked to help support those physicians that were being added to the schedule for just coverage. So the information that we had access to was incredibly important. The introduction of a drug like remdesivir and having the first information generated that we would have something like 5 treatments available for 200 patients here, and then quickly establishing guidelines of patient selection and being able to share that across other hospitals in the country was incredibly important. So you're talking about a limited resource and being able to come to some sort of agreement with our clinicians here as to who would be the patients that would be selected to get the drug first, and have an option for early treatment. So I think these are all the important aspects of what we've improved upon. I can get education in short bursts, as short as 5 minutes, and education like today. I sat in a symposium that ran 5 hours. And all of that, I think, has been helpful. But I will say I still miss the one-on-one opportunities to interact with people. The opportunities to share stories in a collegial setting, in a chat room, ideally, with some sort of libation, as opposed to what we see now. But I think these are the things that I think we'll improve upon. As a faculty member, I think we've made tremendous strides. I think the one thing I do miss, and I mentioned this, is I don't have access to certain areas of the hospital. Now to be able to go in an intensive care unit with a COVID-infected patient, to enter into the operating rooms, to enter into a cardiac cath lab or an angiographic suite. I've been there in the past, but I know for many of my colleagues, that opportunity may not exist, or maybe less of an opportunity in today's environment. And I think an area for improvement does lend itself to some of the areas that pharmacists may not have access to, may not have line of sight into, to be shared in a continuing education program. And I know people will say, well, you focus on the drugs, but being able to see the entire picture from start to finish, I think, is incredibly helpful. And finally, as a faculty member, I think we've done extremely well. I think we've provided a broad range of programs. We've provided programs that range in superficial coverage to provide support for the naive practitioner. We've been able to provide expert opinion for the expert clinician that has a different level of practice. And I think we'll continue to get better as we go forward. And with the opportunity to work with multiple disciplines, I see us only getting, being able to provide support to our nurses and physicians. So thanks so much.
Yeah, there you go.
You spoke about the value of a chat room in the in-person environment. We try to recreate that with virtual chat rooms and bulletin boards and Q&A that we do, essentially by email or by chat function. Does that work for pharmacists? Is that a conducive environment for sharing ideas and asking questions, or does the loss of anonymity
it certainly
hurt
helps,
there?
Charlie. I'll be the first one to tell you I get numerous information blogs every day of what's happening, not only in practice, but in drug development. So I do think they're helpful. I do think, I like to know my network of colleagues. I like to know people. And I think as much as I enjoy sharing emails and information through electronic media, there's nothing better than seeing a person's face and a smile.
Okay, good. Well, you also spoke about the value of libations to chat. I will share with the group that my niece, who just graduated from college, got a job with a rather large wine and liquor distributor. And in these 6 months in which we're grading ourselves, their gross revenues have gone up 300%. So somewhere in some chats, people are libating appropriately. So thank you, John, for the pharmacist perspective. Let's turn now to Amy for the advanced practice nurse perspective.
Hey, Charlie, if I can chime in, we do have a question from the free CME chat line. So I wanted to kind of throw this out at you before we got too far along, and maybe this is something you can ask Amy also. So here's a question. So how is preparation as a faculty member for a COVID-specific program different than preparation for a topic area you've studied your whole professional career?
Well, I'll answer it quickly, and then I'll let Amy answer as well, because we may have different perspectives. I think that I think that the conversations among faculty for a program, when we're planning out an agenda and speaking assignments, I've never seen us rely so much on personal and anecdotal experience. In the past, we've talked about the pivotal clinical trials. We've talked about years of experience. We've talked about how people in different disciplines or specialties handle these issues, because there's published data that we can refer to on that. With the COVID stuff, it's much more, here's what we're doing in our hospital. Here's what my colleagues in emergency medicine or my colleagues in intensive care are saying. And it's, if we were footnoting this, in the past, every slide would have 3 or 4 peer-reviewed journal articles at the bottom. And now there may be, 1 or 2 journal articles there that are observational in nature, and everything else is, personal communication, if you reference it at all. So I think clearly that reflects the changing currency of the issue. Amy, what do you think?
So, yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, one of the ways that we get information as APNs and nurse practitioners and physician's assistants is through various different blogs that we belong to. Now, my area is multiple sclerosis, and I'm heavily involved with the consortium of MS centers, as well as the International Organization of MS Nurses. And we have a blast system. I don't even know what it's called, but people post questions to the International Organization of MS Nurses. And if you're signed up for this system, the administrators will post the question. And the nice thing is that we probably get a minimum of 25 to 30 answers from nurses, nurse practitioners, physicians, assistants, and even physicians all across the world, because we're an international organization. So I read those quite carefully. I'm also a member of the American Academy of Neurology, and the AAN has a advanced practice providers subgroup that post questions, and we do discussion all the time. Now, that's not just MS, that's more the broad range of neurology, but that's quite helpful for us. In my practice, I agree with both Charlie and John, and that is that we need to keep up to date what's going on today. And so much of what we're talking about as advanced practice providers is, what are we seeing today in our clinics? What experiences did we have? What did we come across with respect to patients? In neurology these days, it's all about the immune system. We are knowing more and more every day, it's on the popular news, about the neurologic complications of COVID, and we're starting to see those in our clinics more and more often. So we're hungry for knowledge about that, and we're looking at as many resources as we can get. American Academy of Neurology is really good. I just read something last night that expounds on what we're learning about the neurologic complications. For the purposes of our discussion today, I did sort of an informal poll or discussion with different advanced practice providers, and some of the things that they've talked about is the fact that they value the ability to do online learning and to obtain CE or CME in our respective areas, not just for maintaining licensure, which many of us need to maintain our licenses, but also for our various different certifications. I'm nationally certified as well as internationally certified, and I also require CE hours for my license in the state of Illinois. But one of the things that's very important to the advanced practice providers is that whatever it is that is being presented live is made available subsequently on demand, because many of us just don't have the opportunities during a busy clinic day to skip out and look at something on a computer, or we don't have enough uninterrupted time to get through a whole presentation. So we really want to go back and look at it and listen to it. for the presentations that have been done, you know, a lot of them have started, for example, at 6 p.m. East Coast time. Well, although my brain lives on East Coast time, my body here is in Chicago is on Central time. And so 5 p.m. is just not doable for me. And then the Mountain and the Pacific time. I mean, if those programs are not archived, very often our participants or our advanced practice providers can't even access them. They do prefer interactive learning as much as possible, and I think John brought this up quite eloquently. We like to talk to the experts. We like to talk to one another and talk to faculty members and things, but I actually find that in many of the presentations that have been done, you get a good opportunity to submit questions via a chat box that only the faculty sees. And then the faculty reads them back and you're thinking, yes, that's exactly what I wanted to say, or that's exactly what I wanted to know. So they like as much interaction as possible. Advanced practice providers like to have journal clubs with obviously a link to the article. They're quite interested in published information, albeit, you know, something that may or may not be COVID related. And they also like case studies. Now, whether those case studies are built into the CME presentation or in my case as a CME presenter, a lot of what I do to try to bring the content to life, as I'm speaking right then and there, I say, well, I saw a patient yesterday morning and this is the experience and this is what's happened and this is what I did about it. Again, the caveat that that's given the day and time it was recorded and given what we know, for example, about COVID and impacts at that point in time. Now, we also are interested in the opportunities to talk about things like the immune system, for example. All of our patients are freaked out because you hear all about the immune system and they think that because they have MS, they're immune suppressed. Well, we have to say no. In fact, your immune system works overdrive, so let's get rid of that. Most of the MS medications that we have, it gets bandied about that they're immune suppressants and not. And we've talked to our patients about the fact that no, for the most part, they're not immune suppressants. They are more likely immune modulators. And what does that mean? You know, back in March and April, we were scrambling to figure out what that meant in the advent of COVID. As time has gone on, us as CME presenters, in conjunction with our industry partners, have gotten better and better at laying some of that information out, which is so valuable to advanced practice providers because we have to go back and explain that each and every day to every patient that we see. This is what we're doing. This is the medication. This is what we think it's doing. I've also seen in the MS arena, several drugs have come to market, have been approved and have come to market since COVID began. And while in the beginning, many of our pharma partners weren't particularly, pushing or to talk about their pharmacologic agents, obviously now more and more so we have to, because that's the only way that many of us can even get any information about the new therapies other than likely published phase 3 trials. If we don't have ongoing education, we don't even think about these therapies as options for our patients. We're going to go back and rely on what we knew pre-COVID. So we're evolving along with our industry partners to bring some semblance of information to the clinicians because most places are still on lockdown. I know we are. Nobody can get into our institution unless you're a patient, and now you can come with a care provider, which is really quite helpful because sending an Alzheimer's patient through a university medical center to find an exam room is a challenge at best, believe me. So we're real happy that the university now has decided to allow care partners to come with these patients. But I mean, so those are some of the things that my NPPA colleagues have mentioned in terms of the things that they like and the things that they want. I, like John, could be probably 10, 12 hours a day just listening to and participating in educational programs. Some are CME oriented, some are not. A big percentage of what we got in the beginning was from conference calls and presentations put together with our European colleagues to talk about what the experience was in Italy and what the impacts were, for example, in Italy or the UK. I think we're getting back to some of that now as we're seeing some changes over there and what that impact might be here. But as a CME provider, as a person who is involved in putting programs together and designing programs, but more importantly, as a faculty member, our ability to interact with one another as faculty members, I think, is very valuable. And I've heard that from the participants saying, yes, we liked when you had a back and forth with the 3 faculty members on the presentation. It's a little more unscripted that some people are comfortable with, but I think it's a very valuable resource.
Thank you so much, Amy. Let me ask you one quick question. You talked about the importance of archiving programs because with people's work schedules today, being able to sit still at a specific time and a specific date is often challenging. Another way of trying to deal with that busyness of the learner is to produce these mini or even micro CME programs that are 3 minutes long, 5 minutes long, maybe up to 10 minutes long, and then the CE provider is responsible for tracking the learner's progress, and then they'll issue a certificate when they cross a certain threshold. How do advanced practice providers look at those? I will answer the question first from my perspective, and that is that it's pretty rare that there's a clinical topic that can be addressed to any depth that would actually educate someone. Inform maybe, but educate someone, it's really tough to do that in such a short period of time.
I have to agree with you, Charlie. The complexities of just about anything that you're talking about with respect to neurology or even cardiology or pulmonology these days, you're only going to scratch the surface, and I think that may be somewhat more frustrating than taking the time to go back and look at things. And the Consortium of MS Centers, for example, partners with many of the supporters of this program, as well as academic CME, to provide CME education for people. All of those things almost exclusively are archived on the CMSC website. People could go back as far as they want, but they realize that if they're going back to view something that was presented in April, the information has probably changed 3 times since then. So it's not like you're touting something as the latest and greatest. They have all of that information. And I think for the most part, advanced practice providers would rather have a bit more in the way of meat than just a 10,000 foot view that probably raises more questions than it answers.
Great. Before I turn it over to Christine, just give me a quick grade there, teacher. How do you think we've done this semester overall?
Honestly, overall, I think our grades have been moving up and moving up. But I'd probably have given us a C- for lots of confused effort in the April timeframe. But I'm actually so very optimistic with CME opportunities and the kinds of things that I've worked on and that I know are coming. I'd say a B+.
Great. Thank you, Amy. I'm happy now to move the perspective over to the funder side, the supporter side. And you heard Christine and Lynn introduce themselves. Christine is going to speak first, but I'm very interested to hear how our supporters feel that we've done.
Sure. Thanks, Charlie. Okay, I have a couple grades here. I think for the ability to transition, from live to virtual and pivot, I give, the industry educational providers an A+. Being the platforms have been very effective. I've seen very little technical issues. How has that been effective? I mean, has the education and what has been presented been effective? I think it's too soon to tell. we're getting, we get a lot of interesting metrics on people who registered, people who participated. But again, did they really participate? And, the expectation isn't that someone has to sit and learn for 60 minutes. I think that's unrealistic. But, it's telling that there needs to, we definitely need to make a shift. I'd like to speak to actually a program that was effective during this time. And it was a series of small or short live webcasts during the height of the pandemic. And I work in the field of hematologic malignancies. And this included KOLs, clinical experts from various regions across the country, providing their perspective for different regions, because the impact of COVID has been obviously very regional. And that has been, I think, one of the more effective programs, not only just from a number standpoint. They had a very good turnout, which shows the ability of the provider to reach the audience, but the level of interaction that took place during that was definitely proof that learning was happening. And it was those that participating were allowed to ask questions, but also to express questions that they were getting from patients, what their areas of concerns, what their fears were. And that alone provided insights back to me to take back to my teams, that helped during planning as to help the company understand what the impact of COVID is right now and what the questions are out there. So we did receive a great outcomes report, which is now a poster for an effective educational program. So I really do want to stress that was well done. The timing was right. People want to hear from the KOLs and the thought leaders, but it was interactive and it was proof that learning was happening. And it provided insights that were important that I could use and take back to my team. Other final is, what am I seeing in terms of grant requests now and programs? I think it's pretty much a C to a D. I'm seeing no big difference and I'm not sure if it's realistic right now to expect any big earth-shattering change in digital education, because we're all still learning from this, and we're not sure 6 months from now what healthcare is going to be like. We're not sure a year from now. But it does make me slow down a bit and think about next year and, really not knowing what the situation is. Is there going to be live conferences? Is there just going to be more digital education? I do find ourselves contemplating doing more requests for proposals and seeking more innovative types of educational design than what we have typically in the past. So that's kind of my update from the industry perspective.
Christine, I appreciate you sharing that about potentially going more. I would assume not exclusively, but more to an RFP system. What do you know, or what can you speculate about funding for next year for continuing education programs? Will it remain stable, go up, down?
For us, I think we're in the area of heme malignancies where we've got really cutting edge CAR T cell therapies, cellular therapies. There's such a high unmet need. Our budget is stable. I just hope we can deliver on the right professional education that healthcare professionals need.
Great. Thanks, Christine. Lynn?
I have to say that you're right. Christine actually touched on a lot of the points that I felt we've been thinking about as we're reviewing proposals. So for the transition from live to virtual is very different. I think it really depends on the therapeutic area. And for me, I have to say in the beginning, I probably would have given it a C, but I only because, I think, it's not as easy to say, from going from a live meeting where you have all the bolts and nuts like really figured out to going to a virtual platform where you have to think about the system configurations. You have to think about the learner's access, the ability to really download and synthesize the information for a long period of time, and I think as a supporter, I had a little trouble trying to navigate that space only because I've been to a couple of meetings. I know what it's like to attend a program online, but to really, really, truly experience the online virtual experience as a learner and as a supporter, I felt, there's still some growings that we will have to learn from this moment that we've been through. And I think that's where I would say that C has probably changed to a B only because I think people have figured out, better platforms are needed. And even for me, as I'm reviewing proposals, I'm looking at the IT platform because, it's terrible to provide a support to a program. And then you realize when you go to the program to monitor it, there is disconnection from the actual speaker at the program, or there's technological difficulties because maybe they couldn't really entertain the number of learners that will be actually entering that same platform, at the same time. And those, I think, I feel are nuances that you won't know until you experience it. Or if you've been in the business for a very long time, you can prepare for that. But I think in the state of where we were with COVID in the beginning, everyone was just pretty much, going with the flow and figuring it out. And I could say that's where we did really good in pivoting in terms of, we'll have a contingency plan, we'll plan this way, we'll do what we can do with what we have. But I think overall is just really processing, okay, what really are we doing? And are we really doing it well for the learners who are actually attending these sessions? So, that's where I feel like my grade has changed, and then when I'm reviewing proposals, I'm actually looking at it, not necessarily as, are they meeting the gaps or are they meeting, my educational objectives, but I'm also thinking about as a learner, is it too much, because I attended a program in one of the areas I attended, and I actually logged in from the beginning of the program to the very end. And I was like, oh my goodness, this was a lot. It was a lot of great information. A lot of data that I wanted to really, take in and be able to share that information internally. But for one person to actually attend, all of the key sessions as well as the breakout sessions, that can be overwhelming for a person. And that's something where I thought about, can my learners continue to be in this space of really engage with the education, engage with the learning, engage with other attendees. So that's where the virtual experience, other elements of the virtual experience is needed, where, having the chat room so that, learners can actually connect with other learners or ask those questions. I've seen that, implemented in, like, for example, the MS virtual experience. I thought they did a really good job, providing that platform where you can connect with other learners. You can also know who's actually in the same space as you. When I mean the same space, like who's actually in the auditorium with you. You won't know who exactly, but you can see the counter, and I think as a learner, when you're actually in a virtual meeting and you're like, well, who else is here? Or where are others, or what are some of the questions people have? Seeing that really adds to the virtual experience. And that's something that I now am like, oh, what platform are they using? How do they intend to make it different than just another program they've actually converted to the online space?
I think you're muted again, Charlie.
I pressed unmute, but it didn't work. Sorry. Thank you, Lynn. I want to ask, I don't know if you are comfortable answering this. I don't know if you even have an answer for this, but you were just speaking to, this sort of new era of having to evaluate grants, not just for content and focus, but also for technology. Are there things that you, based on your experience in monitoring programs and seeing evaluation reports from programs that you've supported, are there formats that set off red lights and alarms in your head? I mean, for example, you mentioned breakout. That's an area where you've got to have some pretty reliable technology. If you've got, say, 100 people in a CE lecture, and at some point you're going to break them into 4 groups of 25. really easy to do in real life, but virtually it can, that's one of the places where the technology frequently kind of falls apart. So I guess what I'm asking is, are there things that raise doubts in your head immediately when you see them being promised in a proposal?
Yes, and that's where I actually have to pick up the phone and call the provider. And I've done that before to say, tell me, walk me through how this will really work, or, how do you intend to, deal with this issue, and I think having those candid conversations with the provider really helped me be at ease in terms of, okay, you know what? This is actually a program I believe they can actually execute on this because they've explained to me how they intend to actually deal with this instance if it comes up. And you have to keep that in mind because I feel like it's not just about, the education, but it's also about the experience. If your learner is not having a wonderful experience as they're learning what they're learning, again, one thing is to get the information, but to have that learner engaged so that way at the end of that activity, they walk away learning something new. It's all about that whole overall experience they're getting. And which is one of the things I feel like Amy mentioned or John did. We're already missing the people element to it where you can connect and you can meet someone and you can have those one-on-one conversations. So how can we really provide that, or at least support activities that will provide the same but similar, not quite the same, but similar experiences for the learners where they can say that was a really good meeting. I learned this much, and this is how I really connected with fellow colleagues of mine in the same area.
Great. Scott, any questions from the greater audience?
Let me bring myself back up here. So one question that came over on the free CME text line, this is probably for Christine and Lynn, is how much, if any, COVID-specific education have you supported, and do you anticipate supporting in the coming year?
I think it's part of healthcare now. I think I would be surprised if it wasn't included, and anything that would be relevant. I mean, when you say COVID specific, it would have to be in the title. Probably not, but it would have to be effective of what's going on in healthcare right now and relevant to the learners. So I guess I don't have an answer one way or another.
And it really comes down to the activity. I think you can't just throw the word COVID in it and say that's great and it's going to hopefully stick on the wall and we'll approve it. I think if you think about the issues that we have within COVID, especially within all the disease states, these are real issues where, there are patients who are immunocompromised. There are patients who are dealing with health disparities. COVID is showing a lot more than what we have been seeing in our space, but I think it's just bringing to light what has already been there, so now we're just having to figure out, well, what do we do about this? So I don't think there's any specific, educational strategy that is going to be only focused on COVID, but I think the same issues that you've seen in terms of, access to care, management of therapy, thinking about disease-state education, those should be the same thing that we hope that you would continue to include in your proposals, but really now looking at it from the element of the individual, the patient, the clinician, and their unique challenges they have to deal with. Really.
I agree with Lynn. I'd like to add, as we're discussing this, I thought of a few more things where I've actually been very effective. When I say effective, it just shows me that there's engagement and learning going on. And I've seen where, providers, and it's a relevant topic, but they will actually, they do their homework before and they will survey registered participants and ask them to submit their questions to the faculty ahead of time. So show there's an engagement, but there's still, even if they don't quite make it to that program, you still know what the gaps are and what the questions are, as well as submitting their own cases. If there's that opportunity to provide a case that can be discussed at a program, it does engage them, and it brings the real world experience to that program.
There's one final question. I know we got about a minute left, and this is probably maybe a good one for Charlie, John, and Amy. Is have you seen patients been included in any COVID-specific educational programs that you've been a part of?
So this is Amy. I can start and say yes, absolutely. There was a CME presentation just this past weekend, 3 hours sort of soup to nuts related to multiple sclerosis, primarily aimed at nurses and advanced practice providers. And as that was concluding, there was a similar session that was aimed specifically at patients. Other things that I've done have included patient speakers for the patient perspective. I've done both CME and non-CME presentations that include the patients, but yeah, I mean, part of it is their own willingness to put themselves forward and associate themselves with a diagnosis on the World Wide Web. But yes, definitely in the arena of neurology, we see quite a bit of that.
Yes. No, go ahead, John.
Briefly, Charlie, I know we run a whole host of patient support groups here, and I'm most frequently involved with cardiology. And inevitably, the conversations circle back to COVID in some fashion. And I find myself frequently participating and providing patient information, not only on the disease, but more about explaining treatment options. And I think as we arrive on the cusp of vaccines, there'll be a question about whether the providers acquiesce and support giving a vaccine that hasn't been FDA approved, and whether patients will accept it. And we're trying to provide information to explain, I think, in layman's terms, what's happening to patient treatments and what will be available for patient options. So we provide it. I think the next step is to support it in some sort of comprehensive program.
Yeah, thanks, John. So I want to wrap us up first of all by thanking my panelists. I think this was very informative for everybody. I certainly learned a lot. And I'll close by answering the question that Scott relayed to us, and that is that I've taken a rather unique way of addressing the patient perspective when it comes to COVID talks, because I actually had COVID and was in the hospital for 9 days with bilateral pneumonia and received some of these medications that are now being bandied about as whether or not they should be fully approved and fully pursued. So I don't recommend that as an educational strategy, but it has served me well over the last few months. And I'm happy to say that I recovered enough to do that. So Scott, back to you.
All right, great. Well, thank you. Thank you to everybody on this panel. For those people who are watching this either live or the archive version, there's a very brief survey on our CME Palooza Live page that we use to kind of help evaluate how we did this year and to help plan future iterations of CME Palooza. And to view the next session, which is our final session of the day, just go to our live page and click on the appropriate session link. That session will start here in about 2 minutes. So with that, I'd like to thank Charlie and John and Lynn and Amy and Christine for their time today. And hopefully we will see everyone soon.
Thank you.
Thanks again,